So mental health, where I'm coming from and going to Eastern Europe, absolutely, it's a taboo. I was being torn between these two poles, the business and the baby, and both were just demanding a huge amount of energy. Yeah, I think acceptance is key. Acceptance is the first step, and then getting rid of the guilt and the shame.
This week, we are discussing a subject that a lot of our listeners will not be familiar with. Our guest today is Selma Ribica, who built 2 successful businesses before becoming an investor herself. Selma was building her first business whilst pregnant with her first child, and it was there that she experienced postpartum depression. There was no awareness of mental health in her life until then, and no space to talk about such a taboo subject. So the only way to deal with the depression was to be operational. How does it feel to be torn between looking after your business and looking after your baby whilst you're digging deeper and deeper into depression? Encouraged by her husband, Selma was eventually diagnosed with postpartum depression and started seeking help with therapy. And yet, why did the diagnosis feel like failure? Why was such shame attached to it? Nobody feels ashamed when they break their leg, after all. Selma tells us how, next to therapy and good sleep, she found help in small daily rituals of self-care, like yoga and meditation. Very importantly, they had to make their way into her calendar for her to stick with it. We also learn about the importance of building your network around your needs, knowing that you're not alone, and having allies. And how, as a VC now, Selma helps destigmatizing the subject by sharing her own story with entrepreneurs. Please meet Selma.
This is Naked by the Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. Brought to you by Vladi and Nektarios Lolios. And remember to subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help us share it with the world. Selma, it's really, really lovely to have you on Naked. How are you? Where are you at the moment?
Well, I'm doing really well. I'm based in Tunisia. It's been 4 years. I moved here from London in 2017, looking to get some sunshine after I sold my startup in London, and some sunshine and rest. So it's a lovely sunny day. I can see the turquoise Mediterranean from my terrace and a lot of palms. It's definitely full on spring here. How is the weather in London?
So that's a question for Nektarios. Hi, Nektarios.
Hi, everybody. London has recorded yesterday the highest temperature in March in over 60 years. So we had 24 degrees, sunshine, which is rare, but we're still in lockdown. So there's a slight relaxation since a couple of days ago where we can actually meet with people outside. So it's all very optimistic. It's all very, after this really difficult 3 months of darkness and lockdown, we're getting to a point where it's a little bit lighter. But I follow you on Instagram, Selma, and you just post these pictures of rolling sand dunes and palm trees and blue sea. And when you see this in December or January, it's difficult to really like you.
I'm sorry about that.
I'm joking. It's wonderful.
Bloody, like this, yeah, the spring is coming everywhere. So I'm in Bratislava right now, and our sort of friends and audience listeners know that I've been moving a little bit around in the past few weeks. So from Pakistan to London, met the spring there. So I know what Nektarios is describing, and then arrived here about a week ago. It's under lockdown, but it's beautiful to be back home. It's just reconnecting, and with the sun makes such a difference. So Selma, understand completely what you're talking about, and actually talking about mental health. I mean, being the important factor, right, that influences our emotions and how we show up every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Selma, before we deep dive, and there are many sort of topics that we want to talk to you about and unpack, would you mind to introduce a little bit yourself to the audience in few sentences so that we get a better glimpse of your path?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a fintech entrepreneur turned VC investor. I spent working majority of my career. I spent working in emerging markets. So initially Eastern Europe, but then Southern Asia and Africa for the last 10 years. So I started with M-Pesa. M-Pesa is mobile money fintech product designed for the unbanked. And then after that, I moved on to build my own business in fintech business in London, serving underbanked migrants, which was called Labar Money. I scaled the business and sold it in 2017, after which I moved to Tunisia to get some sun and recover from some big burnout, complete burnout I had after building a business and taking care of my newborn. At the same time. And ever since, I refocused on venture capital. So I first joined the firm here, a well-established private equity player, Pan-African, whom I called African Invest, whom I helped build a venture capital fund, Pan-African, late stage. And over the last 2 years, I've been building my own fund, investing in fintech, logistics, and health across Africa. Early stage fund focused on seed and pre-series A.
Thank you. I mean, we've been nodding the whole time you've been describing the journey. And there are just so many things that resonate. I mean, from emerging markets to building, fintech solutions, and you're really using technology as the power to shift people out of poverty and serve those that have been overlooked. I mean, there is a lot around what you already mentioned around burnout and the mothership, parenthood. So a lot to unpack. You started with saying you sort of pinned yourself into Eastern Europe as the beginning of the journey. And I wonder, so when you were starting your entrepreneur journey in the market that I know very well is coming from it and being, Slovakia country of origin, then moving to emerging markets, both sort of spaces and regions that are quite heavily stigmatized when it comes to mental emotional health. We don't naturally talk about it. When I built those accelerators in Slovakia, we did not have this as a part of conversation. We talked about building a business. This was just not really part of it. Was mental health playing a role for you when you started your own journey as a company builder, as an entrepreneur? What was your relationship to your own mental emotional health?
So I think maybe I'll just take a step back to say an important thing. I think being an entrepreneur, I just had a discussion with some people yesterday in Jordan, mm-hmm. Who are entrepreneurs and building quite a vibrant ecosystem there. And they were like, "What do you think? What's an entrepreneur? Who is a person? How do we define an entrepreneurial flair? Is there such a thing?" Right? And I was thinking about it, and I said, "Yeah, I think for every person individually, there is a different story that in their background, in their lives, that pushes them to become an entrepreneur." You cannot put a same definition on everything, but there are perhaps two ingredients that I see always among all the entrepreneurs that I think are in common. To all the entrepreneurs. One is really some kind of internal deep desire to change or to create something, and that's a highly emotional feeling. It can be a desire to change the status quo, a desire to defy authority, perhaps in a creative way, hopefully not in a destructive way. But there is that internal, and that is a very emotional driver, right? This is one thing that I see among all the entrepreneurs, because this desire to change, to create, to do something else. The second ingredient is the resilience. It's a taking no for an answer. It's the relentless focus on finding solutions, solving problems. So when I put the two, both are highly emotional, and there is no way that mental health, doesn't play a role in entrepreneurship. It's already there in its core. emotions and this drive, this resilience, this relentlessness, they are at the core of every entrepreneur's heart, I think, So mental health, where I'm coming from and going to Eastern Europe, absolutely, it's a taboo, I grew up in Bosnia until I was 17 during the Bosnian War, actually. So it was quite a time that left a lot of trauma on people. But in my family, we never openly talked about it. My mother also come from a military family. So she definitely was raised not to show emotions and the first kind of instinct we have built in ourselves, in our family, was to be operational. Oh yeah, there is this huge trauma, or there is this huge maybe depression or any kind of mental burden now bothering me now. But what I'll just continue being operational. And handling, and it's almost like we are really good, we thrive at crisis times, because at crisis times we know how to focus on like, okay, how do we solve this problem, and let's have like 5-6 work streams at the same time and let's drive them. And it's also a way of escape from focusing on what's inside. Yeah, so that was my initial experience. Initially, I had no clue about mental health until I became pregnant and had my child. And then there was this tornado of hormones and emotions, and it was impossible to ignore. But until then, the way I dealt with any kind of mental health crisis or sadness or grief or disappointment was to remain operational and to execute.
So when we had our first conversation about talking to you, and you said, look, I'll think about a couple of themes that we can talk about. And then when you suggested the subject we want to talk about, which is your experience of whatever you went through after having had your first child, I was thinking, so this was the time we were actually interacting professionally. And of course, nobody would have noticed anything because you were being operational, you were functioning, which is the MO, right? You switch into functioning mode and everything is behind the facade. And the facade gets thinner and thinner and thinner, Absolutely. But nobody knows, right?
You're absolutely right. Yeah. How aware, Selma, you were till, and you already mentioned that the milestone was the motherhood, right? And being pregnant. But I'm still curious a little bit before we go there about that whole sort of journey before that. Like, were there people around you who called you out on this, or were you in some way self-aware? Was there anything you were doing for this? But I can very much relate at the same time also to that operational mode, just working through it.
Yeah. So just to give a bit of a background, so I was determined to build this business, and I found private investors while I was pregnant, without disclosing that I was pregnant, because I thought that could endanger the project. I was worried about perception and things like that, right? So I actually secured things, and I was like, well, I can start in 3 months, and or 5, I don't remember. Right, like a few months after birth, and my plan was to take 3 months off and then to go and build the business from scratch. I did not anticipate that after birth there will be this tornado of hormones and emotions and a postpartum depression. I really don't like the term baby blues. I think it's the most damaging term used ever, because it totally downplays, the kind of difficult emotional states that mothers go through to something that's, oh, baby, it's a nice word, and blues is a very light word. So I think it's really not helpful. So some people were saying, oh, it's just baby blues, and that would...
It makes it sound cute.
It's not cute.
Yeah.
Like, why you make all that hassle or, all that deal.
It's definitely, actually, I didn't make deal. I was just mentioning that sometimes I stare at the wall and it's strange. Or that sometimes I had a bit of an obsession about the temperature in the room where my son was sleeping. it had to, I joke, I say my son was like an orchid because he grew up between 19 and 21 degrees Celsius. I was just obsessed about it because I had anxiety about his well-being, and I was trying to take control over it, right, by controlling the temperature. So there were different signals, and I think baby blues is not a helpful term. And so I did not know that I was going through a postpartum depression. I knew I was a little bit nervous about going on and starting the startup that I was working on, but I was also excited. So there were two different emotions there. So I just did what I knew what to do, which is I remained functional, and I started working on it in a planned timeline. And it was a very, very exciting project. I first focused on hiring. I was even hiring people while I was still on maternity leave, trying to identify great talent from different other fintech startups who became available. And it was really exciting because I get energy from people. So there was also a positive energy coming from it. But then as we started building things, and we were building a complex backend technology to manage FX operations and compliance operations, as well as a front-end product, that is interesting for customers, as well as managing the regulatory aspects, getting the necessary licenses from the FCA, as well as looking at marketing and acquisition and unit economics. And my focus was, I need to remain operational, while at the same time I was torn between the responsibility and the high standards that I put on myself for the business, to reach for the business, the milestones, which is launching the beta, getting the first traction, gathering the first feedback, reiterating, improving. It doesn't stop. And then there was a team that I hired, and I felt responsibility for them to provide the vision, to solve the problems together, to go, towards the goal, to motivate them, to keep everybody highly productive. And on the other hand, I had this, responsibility for the well-being of my baby, which was, of course, everybody has responsibility for their child, but it was exaggerated because I was going through postpartum depression, where all the kind of traumas that I had previously in my life were kind of being projected on this baby. Mm-hmm. Temperature, control is a funny one, but there were many other fears that were going through my head, and then I was being torn between these two pulls, the business and the baby, and both were just demanding a huge amount of energy. And myself, as Nektarios put it nicely, I was just getting, my own energy and my well-being was just getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And there was that pressure there. Mm-hmm. So that was going on for about 6 to 18 months, something like that.
Okay. I feel like that it might be useful that we spend some time a little bit to just share with our listeners on what postpartum depression actually is, because I think a lot of people might simply not be aware, right? And that's also the problem about this issue, is that there is such a lack of awareness of it. Would you like to share a little bit? I also have some stats in front of me, like 80% cases are untreated. One in 5 women will experience the postpartum depression, and they're not really in control of the hormonal change. Would you like to share a little bit more, Selma, in terms of also how it manifested itself in your case, like specifically, like what were the maybe, scenarios you went through, the emotions you were feeling? Let's give it some more color just for people to understand, really.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to a common depression, but it's somehow linked to, it's often somehow linked to the fact that after having a child, one has to take this responsibility for another human being, and this other human being looks quite and is quite vulnerable, right? And I think it's also aggravated by the fact if you as a, you as a woman, we have different sides of our personality, right? There's a professional self, there's a creative self, there is the social self, there is the sexual self, there is the mother self, right? And then there is the creation of the mother, and we need to accept it, and then we have to rebalance it with other parts of ourselves, right? And suddenly in this initial period, all other parts of ourselves are neglected, except the professional self in my case, which I didn't neglect. But I think it takes time to achieve this balance, and so part of the cause is really psychological, but there is also the chemical trigger, which comes with hormones that really rapidly drop after giving birth. So the two are kind of a perfect cocktail to steer the depression. And if one is then ignoring it, it can become quite bad. As I said, I was always a highly functioning postpartum depressed mother, but that came at the cost of getting my well-being getting worse and worse as I was ignoring it and focusing on being functional, and setting high standards both on being a mother and being an entrepreneur. And eventually I reached almost the point of near burnout.
So it's so many different avenues. When you started talking about this, you described how you were experiencing something, but you actually didn't know what it was called. And some people were kind of making light of it by calling it baby blues. Was there a specific moment where you actually either had to sit down or somebody sat you down and said, this is what you're going through, this is what it's called, and now let's face it? Was there a specific incident or?
Yeah, I think it was really, so after a while, I kept on going to work, dropping my child to the nursery, going to work and just performing. And one way of coping was going to sleep. And luckily, I'm a good sleeper, because some people get the opposite. They cannot sleep. And I think that's way worse. I would just sleep 11 hours, 10, 11 hours. And I would be recovered in the morning so that I can just go and do a high intense interval of 10 hours again. Yeah. And then go to sleep again. So this is the first coping mechanism I had, which was, I think, crucial. And then after a while, I realized, look, I really need time just alone, either alone or just with my husband. So I started, I reshuffled our schedule, and we would drop our son to the nursery first, and then we would have breakfast on the way to work together. And during these discussions, one morning, he said, but maybe you are just depressed. Maybe there is a depression. And I was like, oh, really? Never thought about it. But since he had some friends who went through different types of depression, he sort of suspected that maybe some of the symptoms make sense. So this is when I said, oh, okay, maybe I should talk about it with somebody. And that's how it triggered, me started going, talking to a therapist and getting a diagnosis. And it took time, because it almost felt like a failure getting that diagnosis, because we put such high standards on ourselves. And it was like, why did I fail so bad? How did I get here? Well, it's just a diagnosis. It's just like having a flu or sinusitis or whatever. And it took me, I think the hardest thing was really 2-3 months just to accept it and to say, well, it's not bad actually. And then it helped learning that many other people had it. And this is when I decided to actually start speaking about it to my friends and to say, well, this, watch out, postpartum depression may appear if it starts manifesting itself this way or that way. Please don't hesitate to reach out, talk, etc. So it was really somebody, my husband, who brought it up, and then there was this realization.
Yeah. I mean, it just says to how much is it important to have people around us who can be the mirror, right? And play back to us and call us out, sometimes just listen. I mean, all the respect to your husband that he was there for you and that he, made this call out. Also, it's just, I sort of feel like it's awful that we have this, when you were speaking about the feeling of guilt and sort of, probably I'm going to say a feeling of shame, although I'm not one to put words into your mouth, but that's what ran through me when you were describing that, the time to integrate the feeling of feeling like a failure for being diagnosed. Yeah. And I'm thinking, nobody feels like a failure when they break their leg, right? So is that mindset shift that we are sort of, experiencing individually, and I think as a whole
it's the culture, right? It's the culture. First, the cultures I was brought up with, the culture of, always remain operational. And then the culture in the entrepreneurship world as well, right? We are, there is a lot of glorification of entrepreneurship, right? And I think it's okay to glorify entrepreneurs from one hand, because on one hand, we really need to, give them moral support and say what you're doing is extraordinary, is really energy consuming, and you are defying the current order, and you are, David versus Goliath, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's great because we need to acknowledge. But at the same time, glorification without acknowledging that it comes at energy costs, sacrifices of maybe personal relationships, or deteriorating mental health, or just acknowledging there is a mental health strain that comes with doing something like entrepreneurship and taking on that journey. It's actually damaging. It's damaging because we set a standard that an entrepreneur needs to perform best at all levels, achieve outstanding results and a hockey growth curve, and you name it, without acknowledging that the person themselves need to actually invest in their own health, because this is a marathon that will take strain, that will be strain on mental health and relationships, on other things.
I got stuck into something you were talking about earlier, and maybe you can indulge us a little bit in this. Because when you were describing the different selves, right, and suddenly there's this new self that's been introduced to your life, which you need to discover, but one that seems to be taking over some of the others because you need to function as a mother, as a parent, right? That all revolves around identity, which is one of our favorite subjects when we talk to the founders that we talk to, right? Because as a founder, giving up a business, or kind of, you go through all sorts of different identity challenges, right? Can you talk a little bit more about how you experience this from your identity as this high-performing entrepreneur, with the different selves feeding into that? And suddenly there's the Gandalf to your Sauron in Lord of the Rings language, who's equally strong and powerful and's taken away stuff from you.
Conflict is the word, right? There is a really, really strong internal conflict. Internal conflict with who I have built over years as a professional self, as the winner, as the overachiever, and the exhausted person after pregnancy and giving birth, and then a very emotional person, postpartum depression after giving birth, and a very scared person for the well-being of my child, very anxious person with low energy. And I was conflicted. There was an internal conflict between what I had to achieve on the professional front and on the personal front. And that conflict is the most energy consuming and self-eroding thing one can have, It's just a clash of different needs that I was trying to satisfy both and switch from one mode to another. And they were conflicted. So they were, if you may, spoiling me from eating me from inside, from the inside. Yeah.
Did you, I'm curious, have you found any ways for you to navigate through this? I'm curious, where are you today with this conflict?
Yeah. So absolutely, today the conflict is settled. I think it takes,
and that's good news.
It takes a couple of years, I think, to settle the mother self in the other, and to accept and to enjoy it and to put everything in balance. For me, it was really a couple of years, right? And now I embrace my mother self, and I have 2 wonderful children, and I had a second child last year.
Mm-hmm.
I was absolutely dreading that the postpartum depression will come back again. And interestingly, this was also, again, the time when I was starting a new business, which is my new fund. So interesting pattern, I think once I start making 3D printing a baby, I also start making a business. Maybe they are also correlated in different ways, in very positive ways, right? So I was very worried that this would happen to me again. So I took some preemptive steps because I already learned from the last crisis. But talking about the first crisis, the first instinct for me was to fight it and to win over it. Mm. So I was really focusing on the therapy. I was doing cognitive behavioral therapy every week, and I wanted to learn. And it was immense amount of learning that came out of that I hold and own until today, which has been probably the best investment I've ever did in my life. And then there are other coping mechanisms. Is it yoga? Is it just having a walk alone through the park every day? Making little, small daily rituals that gave me that extra energy I needed, that extra reflection. I started meditating. I took up Headspace, a wonderful app. I love their animations. I love Andy's voice. And just doing, meditation for a year, every day, 10 minutes, made a transformational change, in my mindset. So these are kind of the first ones. And with the second pregnancy, I just deployed all of them to prevent everything. And it was great. It's great. I was a bit wobbly because I gave birth just 2 weeks before lockdown and the global pandemic unlocked, because that definitely was a major event for majority of us and gave anxiety to majority of the world. So it did make me a bit wobbly and insecure, but I did not have it second time round because I knew how to cope, how to recognize symptoms, how to act, and how to, balance it out.
Yeah, it feels like you can actually build it out. Like, like, I think this is where your operational self is coming out as well. I feel like I can picture the puzzle or the Lego pieces. In some way, for somebody like me, because I can relate to you, I think in some way I'm wired in a similar way. It gives me hope. So I'm not a parent yet, but the aspiration is there. We'll see what the past will bring. But I was triggered by one word you said, that there was that you accepted it, and I wonder how much the acceptance of the situation in which you found yourself played a role. Can we talk about a little bit about this?
Absolutely. I think acceptance is key. Acceptance is the first step, and then getting rid of the guilt and the shame, which Nektarios mentioned, which absolutely strike me. Absolutely, you have to get rid of it because it's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. And then you acknowledge it and you say, well, now I actually understand that all the good things that I did in my life, all the things that I'm proud of are because of who I am, and the fact that now I'm unwell, it just means that I have to take care of myself. So the realization that taking care of myself had to also make its way into my calendar.
Your priorities. Yeah.
Literally into my calendar. So I'm a planner. So I actually plan things and put them in my calendar. This realization to take that this takes time, and it's a best time spent is key.
Yeah.
I have my what I call my self-care. I actually have a separate calendar color for self-care.
Nice.
And I need to schedule my things. If I don't, it's not going to happen because there's always an excuse. But once it's in the calendar, it's funny. I'm going to talk now, and I'm going to simplify and go down the cliche path. But as a childless man, hearing the word postpartum depression has absolutely no meaning, right? How much of your journey was made more difficult by the people around you, either not understanding what you're talking about or not taking it seriously?
I think not taking it seriously is really an issue, right? Calling it baby blues, as I said, and that's both by female and male part of the population. I think the medicine should be blamed first, and the authorities in medicine should be blamed for, not eradicating this term, because it is damaging. We need to be talking about it. We need to be, helping people recognize symptoms. During pregnancy, one thing that really irritated me, by the way, was that I was bombarded by all kinds of information about what to eat, what not to eat, how to be a perfect mother. Oh, you must breastfeed, or you must do that, or you must do that. And nobody ever mentioned postpartum depression. How is this possible? So everything is geared towards one becoming a perfect mother, but not geared at all about being a happy and a healthy mother, happy and a healthy individual. So this is, I think, a failure of maternal care.
Yeah.
Were there people you could talk to about this beyond your husband? Or now, as you went into the second round, did you have more of a network where you can actually be more comfortable discussing what you've been through?
I think one needs to build their own support network because it's not publicly available. These are difficult things to talk about. I made a conscious decision to talk about it with my friends because that was exactly what I missed. And then when you start talking about it, then other people reach out and say, oh, yes, I heard that you also had it. Can we talk? And it's just so important. It can be life-changing.
Yeah. There's a lot of similarity when we talked with founders about some form and shape of experience with mental health challenges and sort of also how they feel that there's not much support out there. You have to build a support network for yourself. I think what is really hopeful is that we are seeing some, signals and movement. When I was also doing some research prior to our conversation, and yes, this is 100% from a space of privilege, right? There is a motherhood center in New York, for instance, that is doing awareness and they're doing peer sessions, etc. We see this also in the space of generally mental health and entrepreneurship, that there are support networks that are popping up. But I do agree with you that it is still sort of a space that it doesn't have enough attention and we could do more. Selma, when you were in that experience and you were sort of navigating through it, how did you integrate this with the sort of life sharing with your team? I mean, you were building your business, you were hiring people. Were they aware? Or tell us a little bit more about integrating those two.
No, they were not aware. I couldn't make them aware. I felt like I was responsible to be highly functioning. I was responsible to them because they decided to join me on this challenging journey. So absolutely. I don't think they were aware. And at some point I had to delegate a bit more. So maybe they were aware that I zoomed out slightly in about a month or 6 weeks that were really rough. I had to delegate more, and I would consciously choose to attend less meetings and to do yoga session in the morning, so come in a bit later, etc. I felt like I had to step in and take away time for myself or I will melt. And it worked, it really helped. It helped me regain that strength and energy. But no, the team was not aware of the postpartum depression. And that I was also doing this other battle in parallel.
Would you, now when you reflect back, or you talking to, and I'm asking you even as a fellow entrepreneur, so I'm sort of like, trying to learn from your experience, is that if you now talk to me or any other woman entrepreneur, sort of being pregnant, building a business, would you share with them, what would you advise them? Is it to talk to the team? Like, how would you approach it? Would you approach it differently this time around?
I think it's okay to talk to one or two people that are that you find like allies, but because this is a risky project, especially early stage building, I would be still worried what impact they would have on people feeling insecure, about the future. That could add an additional layer of insecurity about the future, and I wouldn't like them to worry about that at that stage. So I'm not sure. Perhaps having one or two allies would be really good, because that could change a lot.
I'm really kind of, as we're reflecting on our conversation already, it's like the layers of complexity that come with being a solo founder, a female founder in the fintech world. And you just, every level of difficulty compounded. And then on top of that, you have this life-defining event. And it's wonderful to see how you talk about it. And we're really honored that you actually decided to share this with us. We're also I think it's also comforting to hear that you took the experience and you applied it into your next pregnancy. So for the listeners who go through their own challenges at the moment, one of the things that we want to leave them with is hope, that you might be in the deepest kind of point of your trough at the moment, but you can get out of this, right? You just need to apply certain things, and the discipline that you use to come out of this with your operational mind, and we have to function and that's the way, right? And it's really, I'm really psyched. Vladi, I don't know, is there anything on your side?
Yeah, I have this, because I like Nektarios, that we sort of transition into the next phase. And I would like to move beyond even the second pregnancy, and the fact that you're building a fund. So you are now changing hats a little bit, right? So you will be sitting on the other side. Have you had any thoughts about this? Because I'm sure that you are also very conscious about supporting other women entrepreneurs. They might be going through this. How are you thinking about this as an investor? How are you thinking about supporting, and not just women, but this is the specific issue and topic that we've been talking about?
I have to say that mental health strain is very common among both male and female entrepreneurs in this world. I've been already acting as an investor for the past 3 years, so already kind of switched sides, and now it's really exciting to build my own fund, and I have a co-founder, so it's really a good time, a really exciting stage of my life when I'm again building something. But throughout this time, like, I'm constantly speaking to entrepreneurs from various countries and building different models, etc. And at different stages, I also took few board roles. Mental health strain is very, very common. And I think what I try to do is to create that human connection with the entrepreneur. It also helps that I used to be an entrepreneur myself, so I have a natural empathy. So I build that connection, and I can help them recognize it and navigate. And I did have one or two cases where I had very confidential conversations with founders in which I told them, look, it did also happen to me. Make sure you invest time in self-care. Make sure, whatever helps you, meditation, running, exercise, integrate it in your schedule. This is a marathon. You are the most important, because if you burn out, everything else, you need to be well and put that as a priority. So absolutely. I think as investors, I'm not the only one, throughout the pandemic, actually COVID, where a lot of businesses were negatively affected. There was an additional mental strain. I was speaking to one founder. He was like, I was stuck in Paris in my 30 square meter flat with the business, not being able to anywhere,
Yeah.
I was like, just call me, go to the park, build routines. I was sharing tips, I was like, build little routines. Is it a daily walk in the park or whatever it is? You need to have that routine that helps you replenish your energy because as I love at Nektarios' message, there is hope. Yes, there is blue sky behind the clouds. They just need to move. And you're going to find it again out there. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that it's also a muscle, right? That we can build. I think that's also what brings the hope, is that there are some tools and ways of getting to know yourself better. I think that's also maybe just coming back to where you started, which was about that deep desire, motivation that is sort of related to self-awareness. So knowing what works for us, what doesn't work for us, what are the small rituals that help on a daily basis. And also thank you for sort of, sharing this approach that you have as an investor. As we deeply, deeply believe it's important as Future Farm, and we are trying to have more conversations about this. Just a few weeks back, we talked to an investor from Singapore, where their approach was also starting with vulnerability. So I think this is a big call out to the investor community, is that showing up as a human to your founders, where they can also, it can help them to also navigate the power dynamics that there are. So I think the fact that you, Selma, today shared your experience with us, and it's going to be out there, and you can share it potentially with your founders, but we'll share it with our community, is one small step towards it. So thank you very much for doing so.
No, absolutely. I really hope that this will help others, know that maybe who are going through a similar experience, to know that they're not alone. This is common. This is normal. This is nothing to be ashamed of. And there is that blue sky just around the corner. So they should invest in self-care.
Join us next week to reflect and digest. You've been listening to Naked by the Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. To learn more about our work, sign up to our newsletter or visit thefuturefarm.co, where you can also apply to be a Naked guest. Naked is produced by Dan Turgel and edited by Catherine Dworkin. And remember, subscribe, follow and rate Naked to help share it with the world.